founder of AK Collaborations, and the top sentence is my belief. Humans are born collaborators. And I personally wake up every day to create exceptional outcomes by creating effective collaboration opportunities. I've been working on this for a long time. If you look in this slide right here, it's kind of busy, but it kind of highlights a lot of the different things that I've done throughout my career. I started off as an engineer, and then I decided I didn't want to be doing what engineers were doing at entry levels. And so I moved into the field of communication, dealing with cognitive behavioral elements. And as I started to progress in that area, I started doing research in that area. So I spent 17 years at the University of Arizona as the director of research, where we created a variety of different collaborative technologies. And that brought me to a lot of different places around the world, including some GP mediums out in very fine, dusty areas, out in ships, and across the world in Air Force bases. And then I left the university and I worked at IBM, and I took on enterprise level collaborations across large scale organizations. And then I moved into Accenture, and I went back to my software development roots, and I have a lot of experience in Scrum and Agile methodologies. And I worked at Air Force Cyber Command, where we were developing some custom collaboration technologies and integrating that into a 24/7, 365 operational environment every 30 days. So we produced software that was put into the field every 30 days. And what I did is I brought in my collaboration background in order to make that happen and do that. And so those of you who have been part of government realize that that's pretty significant. And then I left Accenture and I moved over to Think Tank, and I was their chief collaboration officer for a few years, and I still work for Think Tank as a contractor now. So I've
well, that's really interesting, Mark. What a fascinating background you have in so many different areas and so many different industries and sectors. And this idea of a chief collaboration officer, I don't think we've heard much about that. Can you tell us, what does a chief collaboration officer do?
Well, I want you to take a moment, and if you're in front of a place that has windows, or if you're not, you have to use your imagination. Look out and look at a skyscraper, or think about Apple's new circular headquarters, that gigantic building. Inside that building are many, many people. And so the challenge for a chief collaboration officer is to harness the power of those people inside that building for the organization that they're working for that firm. And then take that power and then translate it into whatever the organization is doing, producing products, creating knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. If you go back and you look at an HBR study, I think it was like 2010 or so, they put out that collaboration officer needs to be the executive to integrate collaboration across the enterprise and work through silos. The article in the lower left-hand corner of this slide says, what does Chief Collaboration Officer do? David at CMS Wire captured my words quite well, where I said that CCO is a dedicated resource to make collaboration a part of the daily doings of a company or of a firm. And that's what I do. And now as a consultant, a lot of times I'll go in and I'll play that role, and I'll work that role from the executive C-suite level down throughout that organization. And that's a lot of what I've done throughout my career, whether I've been working with the Navy or the Air Force or in private industry. So that's what a chief collaboration officer does.
Wow, fascinating. Well, let's hear more about how you've applied that role and those skills in some of the areas that you've worked.
Okay. And I forgot to say, so I have a PhD and it's in communication, and my minor was management information systems. As I told you earlier, I started off as an engineer, and then I moved into communication and did all that work as I was going through getting my formalized education. My current projects, I work in a number of different areas, as you can see, and I put these up to give you an idea of the depth and breadth of the impact. I've been working in healthcare, essentially optimizing electronic health records, particularly for cardiologists is where I'm working, because they're spending an inordinate amount of time focused on the system rather than the patient. So we're trying to generate a better system using digital transformation concepts. I'm working on a technology roadmap with a large pharmaceutical, and that's quite an interesting process where we're gathering strategy, dealing with requirements. I did my dissertation in strategic design, where I integrated about 10,000 people when there was a lot of technology challenges in a strategic design process. And I recently just did a big session with large automotive industry folks, as well as people in the oil industry. So we Exxon and all those guys, and we were trying to understand how lubricants are going to play a role in the future, how we're going to get more fuel economy, how we're going to improve machines through the use of lubricants. So it was quite an interesting project. I work in financial management, developing a digital library with educators, which is a very challenging, interesting project. And then I worked with a large professional services organization who had rapid growth, and they were working to try to be able to sustain a level of growth by transforming themselves as they were growing. So it was kind of like putting together an airplane as you're flying at Mach 2. So it was kind of exciting.
Yes, I can imagine.
So I usually start off with clients and talking about how does digital transformation impact a firm? And I fly United Airlines. I've flown them for a number of years. I've got millions of miles on them. And I'm just amazed at when they did this merger with Continental, some of the challenges that they had. But if you think about how digital transformation impacts your firm, United had a headline in the Wall Street Journal. Continental United merger still shaky years after that. What does that tell you about that organization? Then, of course, recently we've had some other issues with United. Those are headlines that most corporations don't want to have in the front of the Wall Street Journal. The electronic health records concept, 20 million hours lost of physician productivity. That's astronomical. These folks are highly in demand. Have huge work schedules, and it's really a big challenge in that environment. And we're seeing it play out in, Obamacare and all the things that Congress is working through right now. So it has a huge impact. And then one of you, I think Joe talked about this in one of your previous seminars, where only 4% of the companies are actually aligning their training efforts with digital strategies. And a lot of that has to do with communication issues. So I pop up some statistics where managers have difficulty talking about difficult topics with people in their employee. And as we go more and more virtual, as we add more and more digital transformation technologies, does this get easier or does it get harder? And there's debate on both sides. And then I also talk about Herb Simon, that attention. We only have so much attention during the day, and we're getting pulled in multiple different directions. We have telephones going off that we can't control on our desk. We have email and text and chat and all that type of stuff. So, how do we attend to that? How do we make ourselves more productive? And that's a lot of what I do in regard to leading digital change, digital transformation. Top CEO struggles. None of this should be news. 88% of the executives say that they're executing strategic change as they're going through this. A lot of times their strategic change has to do with integrating digital technologies, but 70% of them are not doing it very well. And it's showing up in a lot of different ways. If you go back and you look at the examples that I had for United and many other corporations, I could go and talk about this in ad nauseum. But the concept is that digital transformation is at the C-level, and it's throughout the organization. And how we harness it and how we take it on is critical to how well we can do in the business world. So how do we get started? Everyone wants to be digital, but what does it mean? I ask this question frequently. And did you have something to say? I'm sorry, Quinn.
No, I was agreeing with you. We hear this all the time. You know, everybody is now looking at how do we get more efficiency and effectiveness out of our firm through the use of digital technology. So it's interesting that you're finding that as well.
Yeah, and I usually go in. Excuse me, I need to take a drink. I usually go into an organization and I ask this question using a collaborative technology where I can get a lot of people to participate anonymously. And you wouldn't believe the different aspects of it. The digital, what does it mean to be digital? Oh, we have to integrate Yammer. Oh, we need to incorporate Jive. We need to incorporate, you name the software application. And then we start to talk about that and we narrow it down and we get a better understanding of it. But then we talk about the roles that are incorporated with starting this transition and working this concept. And they say, oh, well, all right, we don't need a chief digital officer. We don't need a chief collaboration officer. We'll just make that an ancillary duty to who? The CTO, the chief technology officer, or HR. Well, usually those folks have a full-time job. And ancillary duty, those who have participated in the military know that that becomes a big challenge when it's tacked onto your full-time job. And then when you have all these different levels of expectations across the organization, rarely do we bring everybody together and start to understand, well, what does it mean to be digital? To the marketing people, being digital means one thing. To the salespeople, that means another thing. To the chief technology officer, that often means another thing. So we need to work together and come up with some sort of common vision as we're going through this. And so then I say the reality is that, digital is a journey with a lot of multiple connected stops. And what we need in order to have success on this journey is to have some type of roadmap, strategy, whatever you want to call it in your organization. There's a lot of stigma attached to those words, but you need to lay it out and say, it's here, folks. Now, how do we address this? How are we going to start working this? So the key is to have a map.
So if I could just interrupt you for a minute, Mark, somebody's asking a question here from the audience, and appreciate that. Is collaboration, chief collaboration officer, a role that you've seen in many different organizations? Are organizations asking for chief collaboration officers? Do they have that as a set role, or is that something that you're promoting? I think that's the essence of the question.
Well, I was hired into an organization as a chief collaboration officer. So there are some that, and I also get requests to come in and be a consultant in that role as chief collaboration officer. So I will take on the full-time role and work across that organization. I think the key is, no matter what you call it, is that you have somebody who is focused on the concept of collaboration across the organization and to be able to allow the organization or the firm to capitalize on those benefits of that person. If it gets assigned too low down in the organization, it's hard to get the attention of the head shed. Yet if it's too high up in the organization, you're going to recognize that you have a big impact down at other levels of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Great, thank you.
Okay. So my mom was a big Elvis fan, so I heard a lot of taking care of business. So I kind of stole TCB and created trust, collaboration, and behavior with our own logo. I've also included this in some of the work that I've done with various clients in the healthcare industry. And so usually people get a kick out of this as we're going through this. As you said in the kickoff, a start for us is the concept of trust. And it doesn't get a lot of play as we start to unfold digital transformation, but it's absolutely critical to how organizations function. So by nature, digital creates a lot of uncertainty. And with uncertainty becomes that mistrust, that large amounts of concern. Again, we get back into, well, what is it? Is digital a people process technology thing that we have to combine in order to produce something? Is it, boards, are they stories, are they micro stories, blogs, blah, blah, blah. We get into those technologies. How do we use it? oftentimes, and I've been called into, and I'm sure you have been called into organizations say, hey, we've spent millions of dollars on a particular technology, yet nobody's using it. And we're not getting the benefit that we expected out of it. And it's kind of hard coming in hindsight in order to do that. But that creates a lot of mistrust, because somebody has sold that multi-million-dollar technology to someone at a high level. Now they're integrating it. They're expecting some sort of results, yet the marketing people are screaming, the sales people are screaming, the production people are screaming, and nobody seems happy about it. So there's a lot of challenge in that. When you add transformation to digital, it becomes even more uncertain, because transformation, it means dynamic change. We're constantly changing. So how are we addressing that? My colleague John Cruz and I published a document called Technology Trap almost 12 years ago. And a lot of lessons learned in there were around the concept of trust and how to create that. And we talk about that in that paper. So I still use that to this day as we're going through this. So we know that leaders place a high level of, or high priority on building trust, on creating that cohesion. Personal bonds allow for motivation, positive impact on the organization. The example that I use is one I was telling you about when I went back into my software development days using Agile. We regularly, delivering every 30 days, had to make a lot of decisions under extraordinary time pressure. And we had a diverse group of people. And my philosophy in running this organization, running this group, was that I wanted to bring people together and allow them to be part of this decision-making process. So it wasn't uncommon for me to pull in my key stakeholders when we're actually creating requirements. So I would have the client. Oftentimes I would have colonels, generals, admirals, senior enlisted people, even very, very junior enlisted people as part of my requirements gathering components. Then I would bring in developers who have a very different world. And then I would integrate enterprise architects and UX and UI guys as we're going through this, bring in their quality control folks. And then, allow this whole thing to be run by a scrum master who can control everybody through policy and function, including myself. And I'm a hard guy to control. So this got really exciting at times, as you might imagine. But enabling this opportunity for everyone to have their say and to have equal weight through particular events really enabled us to do something incredible. And there was a lot of challenge in there, but I think the key in doing this and in exemplifying this example is that there was a what do they call it at Google, the psychology of safety in the group, so that you could feel free to put your issues forward and argue for what you believed in. And I made sure that the QA folks had as much power as the EAs and as the stakeholders, because if we couldn't get the quality assurance guys to put their stamp on it, I can't deliver it into the client. And that's a big deal, especially when you're creating stories and you're dealing with developers who are just concentrating on focusing on what they know. And so there's a lot of give and take, and some of the events that we use in there, and I'll talk about this. Another example is daily stand-ups. Okay, so 15 minutes. You ask 3 questions. What do I commit to? What did I commit to yesterday, and what I got done, and then what roadblocks are in my way? And everybody answers those. You get those done in 15 minutes in your team. Scrum of Scrums. I was running multiple teams. Some were at 7th Air Force, some were at Cyber, et cetera, et cetera. That's where the Scrum Masters and myself as a product guy come together and work through problems. Story grooming, where you're bringing your EAs, your senior developers in, and even sometimes your clients to make sure that works. Story creation, you bring in, I would bring developers into the operations center. something that a lot of guys won't do, because developers often can be quite reticent and very technically focused, and not geared on what the clients are doing. And then, of course, you have the retro, where you're basically saying what went wrong. And then I always had my Scrum Master identify at least 2, if not 3 things that we needed to fix in the next sprint. So those are things that I did in order to help build trust in the organization and make it work.
Now, hold on one second, Mark. I want to ask you a question here. What about, we see a lot of organizations are moving to virtual teams. Global companies are bringing people together in a virtual forum. It's one form of going digital. So how do these methods play out to build trust? What have you learned? What have you applied to build trust in a virtual team or a virtual environment?
Yeah, and that's absolutely a great question. So, I mean, it's really, how can employees truly develop trust for one another when they've never met? And, if we were in a face-to-face type environment, I would say, who in here has ever worked with someone who's never met, who they've never met, or never I hired people that I never met. This would be the closest that I would get to people. And so that's a real big challenge. I mean, the bottom line is you can't function without trust. And as leaders, we need to be very cognitive and very proactive in creating environments where we can build trust. A lot of times what happens, especially in the big organizations where, I worked at, you saw Accenture, IBM, both of those have over 300,000 people. Oftentimes you're thrown together in teams and, there's time pressure, blah, blah, blah. You really need to get going. So it's just say, oh, we'll just put them in this virtual environment and it'll take care of itself. You can't do that as a leader. You have to be proactive about this. And so one of the things that I alluded to it in that last area is that, I make the time to create that psychological safety. I want people to feel comfortable to express their opinions. I want to be able to understand what the strengths of my team are and have other members understand what their strengths are and be able to capitalize on those strengths. So I work hard at trying to build a championship team. There's been as a sports analogy, you're in Boston, you get it, my beloved Bruins are there. But you look at many different championship teams, and oftentimes a team that works very well together will beat a team that is superior. Google did a large-scale study. I think it was called the Aristotle Project not too long ago, if you're not familiar with it. Essentially, they were trying to find out what made productive team members, and they found it didn't make any difference what the makeup of the team was, but one of the keys was participation. The more equal the participation across the team, the more productive, more effective that team was. So, what particular things can you do? There are many, and I'll talk about these throughout. So if you can bring this question back up, I'll allude to them as I'm going through, but I'll get to a few of them, and we can talk to them about here. So if you look at the trust, my slide up here, right? Trust is a key, and it's intertwined with collaboration. People build strong bonds with their mates. So I became Australian for a day. And the concept is that, my colleague is a military professional, and he would say, Marines trust Marines emphatically. Marines trust the Navy a little bit more, or a little bit less, but they still trust the Navy. Marines align fairly well with the Army, but the Marines in the Air Force and the Marines with civilians, that's a whole different game. Yet if you look throughout my career, some of those photos I showed, we're doing humanitarian assistance, disaster relief exercises, where we're bringing large numbers of Marines together with people from the United Nations, people who are working in non-governmental organizations. We're including other services, other country services. And that creates a lot of different challenges, and we see this play out as we go through this. And as you, as a Major General, I'm sure you've experienced this and seen some of these concepts play out here. And you think about the services. I think after World War I, we started integrating a common boot camp type techniques so that people would go through hell together and build bonds with each other so that they would go in and they would be able to fight together and overcome huge amounts of adversity as they're going through that. So,
right. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that.
So again, and here's another example on this trusted collaboration concept is it's always been intertwined with collaboration. And I did, and we allude to it in the paper. And at the end of this, there's some references. But I spent a lot of time working with the Navy in the early 90s. And the technologies that we were developing custom technologies, we were integrating current collaboration technologies as we were going through this. But Admiral Zellabor was CTF 50, which is Commander Task Force 50, when 9/11 hit. And he was running a carrier group, which is a carrier with about 6 ships and some submarines. And then all of a sudden we had to go fight. And we brought together 2 other American carrier groups. And we brought together the UK's carrier, and I think France and Italy were there. So all of a sudden, he's now dealing with 56 ships, huge number of sorties, lots of responsibility. So you can imagine what's going on. The key is that he had worked with us prior to this. So he, in his workups, when they were doing a joint task force exercise to get certified, they were way ahead of the OODA loop, because they were capitalizing on technology. And they used technologies in a very specific way that really enabled trust to build across that organization. His chief of staff, Captain Fitzpatrick, at the end, we interviewed them. This is all on tape, and there's lots of publications around this. But he said, the micromanagement concept is born out of distrust. With this technology and this integrated opportunity, we were able to work through that, even though we had, I would say, an unprecedented force put together in regard to naval history. I'm not a historian, but with all those ships, that doesn't happen every day. You do not train for that. It's hard to bring in different countries, etc. We do exercises, RIMPAC, those type of things in order to do it. But when you're doing it for real and there's lives at stake and you're running missions, it's all there. And we showed success because we integrated what we called the K-Web, knowledge management web there, and some of our technology that we developed was there. But the concept, if you look at that second bullet, is that we use specific technologies for specific standards. Imminent threat and orders were delivered over voice circuits. In the past, pretty much everything was delivered over voice circuits, because that's a lot of what there was in the Navy. You have this keyhole problem where everything has to come in and out of antennas that are on ships. They only work when you're going in certain directions, all that kind of stuff. So we solved a lot of those problems over the years. But voice circuits were imminent threats. So when somebody talked over a voice, something happened, actions happened, orders were delivered, or something was executed. Electronic chat was like having 1,000 telephone lines, right? Time sensitive, administrative. You keep updating people. When people are updated, they feel comfortable. When they feel comfortable, they trust that you're doing their job. They know the training that you've had as a colonel in the field or a squad leader, etc. They just need to have the assurance of what's going on and that things are taking place. For the structured collaboration, we used what we created called CommandNet, and it was a chronological decisions, collective intelligence. People were analyzing data and putting in short little snippets, sentences or two, that were tagged chronologically and had certain tags so that you could sort them and see them. So if when you got an opportunity to sleep for a few hours, you come back, you check the logs, you could see where you were. Since they were being electronically upgraded, they could be distributed across everywhere. And in fact, I mean, the FBI, the CIA, other intelligence agencies were actually looking at these logs while all this was going on. So we added a whole new level of component to military operations. And then the K-Web was this, essentially it was a structured website where we could do analysis and drill downs and go back and search through in history. And Scott Miller was a captain there. He said, the difference was night and day. The level of knowledge that watch standards, He was a senior watchstander, was incredible compared to past deployments. And it was because this information was being shared and people felt discomfort and those type of things. So, and then Admiral Zellebor, smarter, more informed boss makes life a whole lot easier, right? So that's his comment, and I'll refer back to that on that whole trust, because he's actually trusting people to get their job done and do their job, and he's just looking at the updates. So when they get together for those face-to-face meetings, it's not a 2-hour briefing on this is how many bullets we have, this is how many beans we have. It's, you know, some key information being presented, and then the rest of the time is spent collaborating and working on tactics, strategy, those type of things.
Now, this is a very interesting chart, Mark, because as you point out, trust is such a critical part of collaboration, and collaboration is key to transformation, digital transformation in this case, because of the complexities that can be involved. And thinking through the collaboration standards, the methods and the rules by which an organization is going to collaborate, I think is not often thought of. You know, many organizations don't necessarily break it down. Organizations collaborate sort of, you know, by accident or in an ad hoc way versus a very deliberate and structured way, which I think is what you're pointing out here. Choosing different technologies and different mediums for different types of collaboration helps everybody understand, here's what this means. If this is coming through, you know, on this channel, on this medium, it's going to be something like a threat. You know, if we're going to be talking over the phone, it's more likely to be an immediate issue or an order that we're going to have to work on, versus other channels and other mediums that we have decided very deliberately we're going to use for other types of coordination and collaboration. I think that's a very interesting concept, and I appreciate you bringing that perspective from the military, because having a military background myself, I certainly can appreciate the need, and it is sort of the way of thinking, having different rules of engagement, different rules of coordinating can certainly carry over into a business environment where you want to speed up decision making or enhance collaboration in a more meaningful and consistent and therefore trust building kind of way.
Yeah, and that's exactly correct. And I point this out to my corporate clients frequently. They say, oh, well, you know, we're way different than the military, and you know, none of those examples will apply to us. And of course, everybody believes that they're different, and there are differences. But the reality is, for me as a collaboration guy, is, as you saw in my first slide, I facilitated thousands of meetings on a ton of stuff that I have no idea what they're talking about. Like that petroleum engineering folks, I don't know, but I understand what they need to accomplish and build a process for them in order to execute that. And that's why they're more effective. And that's why they bring me in to do that. My colleague, John Cruz, who works at MITRE, said, you know, I never understood how you could do this till I started watching you facilitate, and just understanding that you were just creating the processes that they needed in order to produce the exceptional results that they were looking for.
Yes, very interesting.
So back in here, you know, I started off, humans are born collaborators. We're social animals. You know, most of what we've created in society that's been truly impactful has been done in groups or with other people. We collaborate. We do better when we collaborate. And part of us being human is that we can collaborate. But often, as you said earlier, collaboration is just tossed around very loosely, right? We need, I have a PhD in communication. My mom, she's passed away, but she used to say, why do you need a PhD in communication? Everybody can talk. Well, Mom, you know, here are the issues, that kind of stuff. So collaboration is exactly like that. And in general, you know, we use that word collaboration and we really mean communication or coordination or cooperation. And we don't articulate what the elements are there. Think about multiple levels of collaboration, and I'll go through the levels in just a second, but think about what we're doing. We're now integrating with multiple sites, multiple teams, multiple time zones, multiple cultures. A week doesn't go by where I'm not facilitating a session where I'm in multiple time zones dealing with multiple cultures. I mean, I'm in South America, Asia, Europe, North America, even North and South America, there's big differences that go along, and we have to work through those type of things. So the concept is there's a continuum of collaboration, from information sharing, as Deming took. Jay Nunemaker is the professor here at the University of Arizona, where I did my 17 years and developed this technology. He and colleagues have put this together. So you got the individual work, you got the coordinated work, and then you got the concerted work. So here are the definitions of that concept. The lowest level of collaboration is that individual work, where all I'm doing is exchanging messages. I'm doing the updates, the chats, that kind of stuff, the blogs, the emails, the posts. This is where I'm doing my job. I'm just updating people as I'm going through this. And if they're comfortable that I'm making the progress that I need to be, like we were dealing with Admiral Zelibor, right? He's got that low level of updates coming in with his logs, those type of things. All the rest of the folks, they know what's going on. They're good to go. You don't need to integrate with them. That coordination concepts is between groups in order to achieve some particular objective as we're going through that. And a variety of different technologies that we can work in order to do that. Wikipedia is a great example of that. And then where I spend most of my time is in the collaboration, the concerted work, where we need a concerted effort. We need to have a concert. We need to have an orchestra playing as well as they can, that's practiced and following particular processes in order to produce an outcome. Not saying that I can't roll with jazz, but you better have the right people if you're going to do jazz, right? You got to have people that can improvise, understand what the other guy's job is, and then jump on it and capitalize on it and make it work. So that's where I live, and those are the levels of collaboration. That's what I bring into organizations when we talk about digital transformation.
Well, that's really interesting. Somebody on the chat here just made a comment that the word collaboration itself has the word labor in it. So your idea of concentrated work and a co-labor, a co-working effort across an organization is an interesting point. Thank you for that.
That's amazing. I've been teaching collaboration, studying, doing research for over almost 35 years. And I never had anybody point out that labor's in the middle of that word. And I never recognized it. So that's really cool. So whoever put it up, thank you very much.
Thanks for that comment.
Definitely going to steal that. But yeah, I mean, and that's the concept that we're working through. And as you can see in this graph, I put this up because, and often I'll throw this in front of my clients, because the amount of effort, the amount of resources that you have to put towards something is indicative of the type or the level of collaboration that you plan on doing, right? I mean, you could easily, my colleague often says that he can do very effective collaboration with a great process and a 1980s bulletin board type system. Because if you have that process, and you have that known understanding, you have very clear tasks with definitive goals, you don't need to spend a whole lot of time there, and you're just using it as an exchange of information. But as you move down to that higher level of chaos, your level of effort goes up, and it gets much more complex, and it's a lot more challenging as we're going through this.
Yeah.
So now we're at the meat of where I wanted to get, which is business behavior. And so I'm not going to read these, but the concept here is that these are behaviors that I've seen that organizations and firms can work to execute in order to improve their effectiveness with digital transformation. All too often, as a person that comes in and designs systems, what happens? I'm invited in by the senior level executives, by the leadership, and they said, this is what we need. We need to know what our sales projections are. And okay, great, let's go out, and then they go to the CTO and say, get us something to do that. And they go out and they buy a CRM. And then they say, all right, we've got a great CRM, let's implement it. And the sales guys are going, I'm not putting any of this junk in here. This is slowing me down. You see how this all works out. So you've got to think about how that system is going to be used up and down. And I use the chain of command because this came out of a military home, but it up and down that organization. Think about the support staff that has to support a sales organization. Think about how marketing can capitalize on a CRM. Think about how HR can capitalize on a CRM. How are they going to be able to use it? I would, I'd bet a huge sum that most organizations don't think all of that through as they're integrating these large scale systems. I mean, you see, the professional services firms spend a lot of time with, integrating the Workday, SAP, those type of systems. In the educational area, I've seen, SAP used to be the primary component, but they weren't really satisfying what was needed in education. So, Moodle and other open source capabilities came up, and the big universities started supporting that because they needed to do those type of things. It doesn't have to be great. Inexpensive, simple technologies. I'm working on a pilot study with my financial management folks right now. And, we're spending minimal amounts of money and having huge effects. But we've got the right technology and we got a good structure and we're seeing it and we're going to grow it as we go through there. Frequency of use is critical. Make sure your system is going to be used. It's kind of like you think of, TurboTax. My colleague says, oh yeah, I try to get my 75-year-old dad to use TurboTax. He's like, no, I've been doing this by paper. I'm not going to do it. Me, I'm going to be doing taxes for a lot longer. I'm willing to invest and figure out how to make that used. And then that whole concept of digital transformation, creating more work. You're going to be doing different things, but be cognizant of the workload that you're adding into that organization. So those are a lot of my behavior level components in there. Any questions regarding this, or?
So we do have a question with regards to examples where you've seen organizations adopt this approach. Are they able to measure their degree of collaboration? Do they see measurable outcomes and impacts on business outcomes is the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll refer to that Project Aristotle study that Google did. They've got decades of data. They're very analytic driven. In IBM and Accenture, where I both had experience, they've done that. My clients, if it's not measured, it's not done in my eyes. I'm a scientist. I'm an academic, so I do put that in there, and I try to get the the metrics that are easy, and then the metrics that are more challenging, right? So the easy metrics are, as I said, you integrate a system in an organization, and you say, well, how's the integration going? It's going great, boss. Well, how do you know that? Well, we've had 58,000 logins in the last 3 hours. Okay, well, that's great, but what does that mean? What did they do when they were in there? How long were they in there? What data did they interact with, et cetera, et cetera? And then triangulate that with surveys that measure your level of collaboration. I did a stint with NATO doing collaborative readiness. So we did a collaborative readiness assessment with NATO before they were certified to go and deploy. And so we had worked with an organization to create a number of different measures and then go out and execute that. So there are a number of different measures. So I say, you grab the digital, the analytical data that you can, and you do it smartly. Then you triangulate that with behavioral measures, where you're actually having people fill out surveys, or they're doing unbiased observations. I've worked with MITRE quite a bit, where they come in and they do analysis of some of the technologies we created, and they have people that stand around and measure certain behaviors. And then go in and I strongly advocate using a collaborative technology where you can do focus groups with a number of different people, have them contribute simultaneously. Instead of it being, 2 or 3 days of their time, you can usually knock this out in a few hours in doing those type of things.
Interesting. Thank you.
Are there, and so this is where I live. This is where I spend a lot of my time. We developed a technology at the University of Arizona in the mid 80s. And it is a technology that allows us to work in that concerted effort area. I mean, originally, it was designed to improve the software development process. It was developed by Jane Enemaker and hundreds of PhDs over the years. But what it allows is it allows for the inclusion of a large amount of people. It allows for parallel input, where you can have synchronous and asynchronous collaboration. You can be anonymous so that you can allow people to contribute and have their ideas stand alone without the moniker of CEO or general or admiral, which is quite powerful. It allows us to create some structure around developing a process in order to reach that end state. And then, prioritize things. Oftentimes I will go into sessions and I'll start with groups that are in tremendous amounts of conflict and just find out where they stand on particular issues so that we can have some common ground to work from. I've worked with a school district, Marana School District around here they were having fights. I mean, people were literally having fist fights in town halls and those type of things. We were able to bring people together to have them focus on what they wanted for their students 12 years out. And we made a rule saying, look, if we get 75% agreement on anything, we're tabling it as something that's gold. And we're moving on. And I've worked at 50% depending on the particular item. And then, really made some huge breakthroughs and gotten rid of the things where, there's 0% agreement. They're never going to agree. Let's work in the meat area. We'll spend our next 2 hours and create actions that we can deliver in that amount of time. And that's where you can really have some tremendous benefits. Back in the beginning of this, you asked me, are there particular things that you can do with virtual teams that allow you to generate trust in these environments? I use this tool quite successfully, and it's actually come from some people that I've trained that work at a large organization. I thought this was absolutely fantastic. One of the things they did is before they started a session, that they were working with a new group that they had just put together, and they had a tremendous timeline. But the leader was very intuitive, and they spent, I think it was about 5 minutes. There's 20 people on the team, and they spent about 5 minutes collecting ideas on what people like to do on their day off. And so they got, 20, 30 ideas in a minute. And then they took those ideas and then they put them into categories. And so you had things like, cooking, athletics. I think they broke athletics down into extreme athletics and, like jogging kind of thing, vice, mountain biking at night and stuff like that. And they laid this all out, and then they did it in identified mode. And what they did is they developed little cohorts of, in academics, we would call this homophily, right? Where people have overlapping fields of experience. So now you've got people who are software engineers, quality assurance people, all different forms of life, but they do similar things. And the cooking thing was really cool because in tech, a lot of times men outnumber women. But what we had found was the men were the cooks. in this particular group. So it was really kind of cool. And it actually, when we did get together, we were able to share with our cooking team. Actually, put together some food, and we had quite a nice event around that kind of stuff. So that's one of the things that comes.
Hey, Mark, we had a couple of questions here I want to slip in. Somebody's asking, can you tell us a little bit more about what do you mean by parallel collaboration?
Parallel, that everybody can speak at once. So if we were set up in this environment, and say there's 50 people on this call right now, and we were doing a session, and I asked everybody what they like to do on their day off, all 50 of you could type at once, and we would have a large list of 50 or maybe even 100 ideas. So that's what parallel collaboration is.
Okay, great. And then somebody else is asking, from a best practice perspective, have you seen ways that organizations can actually speed up collaboration so that you go from being, just a bunch of people who don't know each other very well to actively collaborating?
Yeah, I mean, so the critical component there is that engaging so that people trust each other, right? As they're making this work. And also, so you can do a couple of best practices, right? So you saw one of my best practices, which was identify how you're going to use different technologies for your project so that people are comfortable. They know where this information is coming. I've experienced this, and I assume many others have, but there's a huge reliance on email to do everything, including sending gigantic files and all that kind of stuff. And we all have hundreds and thousands of emails, and we have to search, and search is horrible, blah, 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 blah. You say, no, we're not going to do that. All of our documents are going to be put into this place. And then you're going to have, in order to do that, you're going to have to meta tag them. Oh, no, meta tagging, yeah. But it's not that hard. I've worked with organizations where you can allow that. I've even got, Neanderthal senior executives to understand that concept, because I can show how that affects the project at the end. We all start off with great expectations, but if we don't have a map, that strategy, that layer to put things together, that's going to be really challenging. So the first thing that I work through is working to get that psychological safety. I want people to be able to communicate with each other. I want to understand. I go through a naming thing, and I'll say, all right, Kim, tell me what you did yesterday. Then I'll go, Harold, you tell me what you did yesterday, and we'll listen, and we'll go through that to get people comfortable doing that, because I want to hear you. And if I'm working with a group that's got diversity in it and I don't understand that, I'm going to be honest about it. So lead by example. I'm going to say, look, I am not a Muslim. I don't know what it's like to be a Muslim. If I'm doing something that's bothering you from that perspective, then you need to be able to help me understand that. I'm not a woman. I can't understand what it's like to be a woman working in a tech field. Help me understand that, and I'll work with a team in order to make that. So I try to make that safe world. And then I work a lot on dependability, and then structure and clarity. And those three things are really geared. And if you have structure and clarity, dependability, just kind of, you don't have to spend a whole lot of time into that moment. So does that make sense?
It does. So dependability, structure, and clarity sound like really important behaviors for leaders to have themselves and reinforce within the team to enhance trust and collaboration.
Yeah, and that structure and clarity is also not just for what our tasks are, because all too often we do that. I worked a lot with the special forces guys, and they have different teams that do different things. But one of the things that they know is they know that their brother or their sister has their back, and that's huge. And you can do that in industry, but you need to understand, what are my skill levels? I'm a big guy. I'm 6 foot. I'm 200 pounds. I'm not the most little agile kind of dude. I've got a great friend that he's very agile. He can climb up a mountain in a very short period of time. But, and that skill may be needed, but my skills may be needed as well. And we kind of work that and integrate and understand. And that's that dependability that you can trust, that When you're in trouble and you need to be lifted, I can lift you. But when I need somebody to be at the top of that mountain, you're going there, and you need to get there because it's my butt on the line down here. And you know, working to understand that and create that type of impact on the team is really very, very important.
That's great. Well, Mark, as we kind of come to the end here, let me see, are there any other questions out there among the group? I'm not seeing anything right now. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you so much, Dr. Mark Adkins, for your insights and all of those very interesting stories about how to build trust, collaboration, and the behaviors of dependability, structure, to support that. Would like everybody to remember that our next digital transformation web talk is coming up next week. So we're doing 2 in the month of June. We've got 2 guests coming up next time. Scott Foote is the CEO of Protineum, and Jerry Buchholz is a CISO. And we're going to have a 3-way conversation. So between myself, Scott, and Jerry, we're going to be 3 of us on the line talking about leadership and risk intelligence. So how do leaders manage risk, and what are some of the capabilities to do that, particularly in the area of information security, and how this is applied will be kind of the perspective that Jerry brings us. So I look forward to seeing many of you next time when we come back together next week. Thank you again to
coordinated collaboration there
for being an outstanding sponsor for all of our webinars. And just to leave everybody with this final word, leadership is a daily decision. It's a daily activity of building trust, building collaboration, and applying those behaviors to bring everybody together. Thank you so much again, Mark. Thanks for being part of this. Thank you to everybody out there. We are recording today's event, so we will have the video posted in the next couple of days. Appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you guys next time. Have a great one.